You know that moment when you're about to make a purchase and your hand actually pauses over the keyboard, not because you don't have the money, not because you can't pay it off, but because someone at some point told you that keeping your credit card below 30% was the golden rule, and now it's just living in the back of your brain like a tenant who never pays rent. Maybe you've restructured a purchase around it. Maybe you've left a balance on a card on purpose because you heard paying it off completely was somehow bad. Maybe you've opened a second card, not because you wanted to, but because someone told you it would help your score if you spread the balance out. And here's the thing, you're not wrong for following that rule. It came from somewhere real. Financial influencers repeat it. Your bank's app probably has a little gauge that turns orange or red the moment you cross that threshold. It feels official. But what if I told you the 30% rule is one of the most widely misunderstood pieces of financial advice in personal finance? Not completely wrong, but not completely right either. And for a lot of people, the way they've interpreted it has actually been doing more harm than good. Let's talk about this properly. Here's the thing about personal finance advice on the internet. It gets simplified until it's almost fiction. Someone reads a credit bureau's educational content. They distill it into a single number. That number gets shared in a Reddit thread. Someone turns it into a reel. Now it's gospel. The 30% rule is a perfect example of a guideline that got laundered through 10 layers of oversimplification until it started sounding like a law of physics. Like if you cross that line, something fundamentally breaks. Like your credit score will crumble, lenders will blacklist you, and your financial future dims a little. And look, I'm not here to make you feel foolish for believing it. The financial system is genuinely confusing, and when someone gives you a concrete rule, you hold on to it. That's just human nature. We love clear instructions in a world full of ambiguity. Tell me a percentage, and I'll build my behavior around it. That feels like control. But most financial rules that get this popular are half-truths. They contain a kernel of something real, wrapped in oversimplification, and they survive because they're easy to repeat. The truth about credit utilization is actually more nuanced, more interesting, and honestly, more empowering than stay under 30%. Because once you actually understand how this works, you stop managing your credit out of anxiety and start managing it with clarity. Let's start from the beginning. Your credit score, whether you're in the US dealing with FICO or VantageScore, or in another country with their equivalent, is essentially a number that tries to predict how reliably you'll repay borrowed money. That's it. Everything that goes into the score is just a different angle on that same question. Is this person likely to pay us back? Now, your score is built from several factors. Payment history is the biggest one. That's just whether you pay your bills on time. Then there's something called credit utilization. That's the one we're talking about today. There's also the length of your credit history, your credit mix, and how recently you've applied for new credit. Credit utilization sits at roughly 30% of your total score, depending on the model, which already means it matters, but it's not the whole picture. So what is credit utilization exactly? It's the ratio of how much credit you're currently using compared to how much credit you have available. If you have one credit card with a $10,000 limit and you've spent $3,000 on it this month, your utilization is 30%. Simple math. The reason this matters to lenders is psychological and statistical. If you're consistently maxing out your credit, it signals you might be living close to the edge financially. Not because spending money is bad, but because high utilization over time has historically correlated with people who struggle to repay. That's why credit models pay attention to it. So far so logical. Here's where the 30% rule enters the picture. At some point, credit bureaus and financial educators noted that people with the best credit scores tended to have lower credit utilization, often below 30% and frequently much lower than that. This observation got turned into a prescription. Keep your utilization under 30% and you'll be fine. And that prescription became the rule. But there's a critical distinction that almost never gets explained clearly: the difference between a threshold and a target. The 30% figure was never meant to be a target. It was an observation, a rough ceiling above which credit scores tend to drop more noticeably. But saying stay under 30% is a bit like a doctor noticing that patients who weigh above a certain amount have more heart problems, and then telling everyone to stay just under that number. It's not wrong exactly, but it misses the point. Lower is generally better. Much lower, in many cases, is much better. Studies on credit scoring behavior, and FICO has been fairly transparent about this, consistently show that people with excellent credit scores, those in the 750 to 800 plus range, typically carry utilization rates under 10%, sometimes under 6%, not 29%, not just under the line 28%. We're talking single digits. So, if you've been carefully managing your spending to hover just under 30% because you thought that was the sweet spot, you've essentially been parking your car just inside the speed limit while wondering why the GPS is still showing a longer route. Now, here's where it gets even interesting. Credit utilization is what's called a snapshot metric. Unlike your payment history, which builds up over years and stays on your report for a long time, your utilization resets every single month. Every month, your credit card issuer reports your balance to the bureaus, and that balance, compared to your limit, becomes your utilization figure. This means your credit score is not permanently damaged if your utilization spikes during 1 month. Buy a flight for your whole family in December, hit 60% utilization, and pay it all off in January, your score will likely recover quickly once the next reporting cycle catches up. This is something that almost nobody talks about when they explain the rule. People carry this ambient fear that crossing 30% even once is a permanent scar. It's not, and understanding that changes how you actually behave with money.
Let me give you a real-life example. Imagine someone, let's call her Priya. She earns a decent income, has one credit card with a $6,000 limit, and pays her balance in full every month. She's financially responsible by any reasonable measure. But every time Priya needs to make a big purchase, a laptop, a vacation deposit, car maintenance, she hesitates. Not because she can't afford it, but because that purchase would push her over 30% utilization, and she's afraid of what it'll do to her score. So what does she do? Sometimes she splits purchases across multiple payment methods awkwardly. Sometimes she delays purchases until after her billing cycle closes. Sometimes she just doesn't buy something she actually needs. She's spending mental and emotional energy managing a number based on a half-understood rule. And ironically, her score, while decent, isn't as high as it could be because she's treating the 30% mark as a target rather than a warning sign. And she doesn't know about the reporting cycle, so her card often reports a balance even in months she planned to pay in full. That's the cost of financial misinformation. Not bankruptcy, not disaster. Just a constant, low-grade anxiety, slightly suboptimal decisions, and a score that doesn't fully reflect what she's actually doing right. Now let's talk about what really moves the needle. First, timing matters more than most people realize. Your credit card issuer typically reports your balance to the bureaus once a month, usually around your statement closing date, not your payment due date. These are two different days, and the gap between them is actually where a lot of confusion lives. A lot of people think, I pay my balance in full every month, so my utilization should show as 0. But that's not how it works. If your statement closes on the 15th and you have $2,000 on your card, the issuer might report that $2,000 to the bureaus even if your due date is the 30th and you fully intend to pay it off. Your reported utilization could be 30% or 40% in a given month, even though you're a responsible, full balance payer. This is why some people who are excellent at managing their money are genuinely surprised when their score is lower than they expected. They're doing everything right by their own understanding. They're just not aware of when and how the snapshot gets taken. If you want your utilization to report as low as possible, the trick is simple. Pay down your balance before your statement closes, not just before your due date. That's the date your issuer typically reports to the bureaus. Pay before that moment, and your utilization will reflect a much lower number. Second, your credit limit is a lever, and most people ignore it. If you have a $5,000 limit and spend $1,200 a month, that's 24% utilization. If that same card had a $12,000 limit, that same $1,200 becomes 10%. Your behavior didn't change, your spending didn't change, but the number that appears on your credit report changed significantly. This is why requesting a credit limit increase, even if you don't intend to spend more, can improve your credit score without you changing a single financial habit. You're not borrowing more, you're not increasing your risk, you're just widening the denominator, which makes the numerator look smaller. Now, there are caveats here. Requesting a limit increase sometimes triggers a hard inquiry, which can temporarily ding your score a few points. And if you're not disciplined, a higher limit can become an invitation to overspend. Those are real considerations, but the underlying math is real. More available credit with the same spending is lower utilization, which is better for your score. Third, and this is the one that surprises people most, having zero balance is not always the best thing for your score in a given moment. Wait, what? I know, stick with me. There's a concept in credit scoring around what's called credit activity. Completely inactive credit doesn't tell a lender much. If all your cards show zero balance for months, that's not as useful to a scoring model as a card that shows regular low utilization and consistent on-time payments. Now, this doesn't mean you should carry debt. Carrying debt to build credit is a myth that has cost people real money in interest charges. You don't need to carry a balance to demonstrate credit activity. What you need is for your card to be used and paid off, which creates a low reported balance if you time it right. The ideal scenario for most people is using your credit card regularly, paying the balance in full every single time, but making sure some small balance shows up on your statement before you pay it. That's the signal. Low utilization, regular activity, on-time payments. Here's the shift I want you to have in how you think about all of this. Most financial anxiety around credit scores comes from treating the score as the goal. Get the score, protect the score, don't do anything that might hurt the score. But your credit score is not the goal. It's a tool. It's a signal to lenders about your behavior. And if you focus on the behaviors, paying on time, keeping debt low, using credit thoughtfully, the score takes care of itself. You stop performing for the algorithm and start actually living financially well. The 30% rule exists because someone needed a simple heuristic to give confused people a starting point. And in that context, it's not terrible advice. If someone is carrying 80% utilization and has no idea where to start, try to get under 30% is a reasonable first step. It's directionally correct. But it's a starting point, not a destination. And for people who've already internalized it as gospel, people who are otherwise responsible and thoughtful, it often becomes a source of unnecessary anxiety rather than a useful guidepost. There's a priceological principle called the rule-following trap. It's when people follow rules so rigidly that they lose sight of the underlying purpose the rule was meant to serve. They optimize for the rule, not the outcome. And with the 30% rule, that's exactly what happens. People stop asking, am I managing my credit well, and start asking, am I under 30%, as if those two questions are the same thing. They're not. The real question is, are you using credit in a way that demonstrates reliability and restraint? If the answer is yes, your score will reflect that over time. Maybe not instantly, maybe not perfectly, but over time it will. And here's the thing about credit scores that the financial anxiety industrial complex doesn't always tell you. Unless you're actively applying for a major loan in the next few months, day-to-day fluctuations in your score often don't matter as much as you think. If your score dropped from 748 to 731 because you had a high utilization month and then recovered the following month, the practical impact on your life is likely close to zero.
Where credit scores matter, mortgages, car loans, business credit, certain rental applications, the lenders are typically looking at the score over time, your payment history, your debt-to-income ratio, and a bunch of other factors. A single month of elevated utilization that you've since recovered from, usually a non-issue when someone is manually reviewing your application. The score matters most at the extremes. Very high scores unlock genuinely better rates. Very low scores create real barriers. Everything in the middle is more about direction of travel than exact number. So what do you actually do with all of this? Let me walk you through a few practical shifts, not rules, shifts, that will serve you better than the 30% rule ever has. The first one, find out your statement closing date and pay before it, not just before your due date. This is small. It takes 5 minutes to figure out, and it's one of the easiest ways to lower your reported utilization without changing how much you spend. If you pay down a large portion of your balance 3 or 4 days before your statement closes, that's what gets reported. That's the number that shapes your score that month. The second, if you haven't asked for a credit limit increase in a while, consider whether it makes sense to request one. Not because you want to spend more, but because widening the gap between your available credit and your typical spending lowers utilization by default. If you trust yourself not to treat a higher limit as an invitation to spend more, this is a straightforward optimization. Check whether your issuer does a soft pull or hard pull before requesting. Some do soft inquiries that won't affect your score at all. The third, stop thinking about your utilization in terms of a single card and start thinking about it in aggregate. Credit scoring models look at both per-card utilization and total utilization across all your cards. So if you have 2 cards and one is maxed while the other is empty, that's not the same as having both cards at moderate levels, even if the total is the same. Spreading usage across cards can help, but the cleaner solution is just not carrying high balances in the first place. The fourth, and maybe the most important one, let go of the idea that your credit score needs to be managed daily. A good credit score is the byproduct of good financial habits, not the other way around. Pay your bills on time. Keep your debt low relative to your income. Don't open 5 credit accounts in 6 months. Don't close your oldest card for no reason. Do those things consistently and your score will trend in the right direction without you having to obsess over it. If you find yourself checking your credit score weekly and restructuring purchases around what it might do to your number, that anxiety has a cost, not just emotional, behavioral. It creates friction around decisions that might actually be financially smart, and it takes up cognitive space that could be used for things that matter more, like building savings, negotiating a raise, or thinking about what you actually want your money to do for you. And finally, if you're in a position where you do need to maximize your score quickly, you're buying a house in 3 months, you're applying for a business loan, something with a real timeline, then yes, temporarily optimizing utilization makes sense. Pay down balances aggressively before your statement closes. Get utilization to under 10% if you can. Ask for limit increases where appropriate. That short-term optimization for a specific goal is entirely rational. But doing that indefinitely, every month, for no particular reason other than a vague sense that higher score equals better, that's where the anxiety lives without the proportional benefit. Here's what I want you to walk away with. You've been carrying a rule that came from a real place but got distorted on the way to you. That happens constantly with financial advice. The person who originally wrote that keeping utilization low improves your credit score was correct. The person who turned it into never go above 30% was oversimplifying. The person who turned that into 30% is the magic number, aim for it exactly, was leading you slightly astray. And by the time it reached you, it had become this quiet source of stress that wasn't earning its keep. That's not a personal failure. That's just how financial information travels. It gets compressed, it loses context, and then people like you and me try to do the right thing with incomplete information, and we end up with anxiety that doesn't match the actual risk. The real goal here isn't a perfect credit score.
The real goal, if we're being honest, is a quiet financial life. One where your money is working, your debt is manageable, your credit is healthy, and you're not constantly second-guessing whether you're about to make a mistake. That quiet life doesn't come from following rules perfectly. It comes from understanding what those rules are actually trying to protect you from, so you can make smart decisions without the noise. Your credit is not a fragile thing. It's not going to shatter because you had a big month. It responds to patterns, and if your pattern is responsible, your score will reflect that. It might take a few months, it might move more slowly than you'd like, but it moves in the direction of truth over time. And honestly, if your score is somewhere between 700 and 750 and you've been worrying about how to push it higher, check what your actual loan rates look like in that range versus the 800+ tier. Sometimes the difference is a fraction of a percentage point on interest. Sometimes it's genuinely meaningful. But do that math specifically for your situation, not in the abstract. Because abstract credit anxiety helps no one. You're not behind, you're not broken. You've just been operating with one outdated map. Now you have a slightly better one. Use it accordingly.